In a world where left is up and right is apparently wrong, do souls make sense of it all? Or at least have fun trying? Gear up, friends, for Chicken and the Dawg.
Welcome to another episode of Chicken and the Dawg. I am the dog, and with me, as always, is the guy whose ego is as big as the banner of Steve Spurrier hanging on William Bryce Stadium 10 years ago, the chicken. What up, dog?
You should all be so lucky.
I'm telling you, man, when I first time I saw that banner, I almost threw up. How obnoxious could that be?
Beauty catches everyone differently.
Yeah. The only good thing about that day is I was taken to that famous chicken place right outside the stadium, and was it wonderful?
Barney's always delivers. Would love to have them on as a sponsor because who doesn't love great fried chicken?
Oh, my pastor says there will be fried chicken in heaven. I'm just saying. So look, guys, I mentioned at the end of the show last week that we were potentially going to have Uncle Kenny on the show. And look, some things, scheduling conflicts happened. He couldn't make it. He was still on the road. I'm not exactly sure where. It was a distant sound. It was going in and out of service when you talk to him. So I don't know exactly where he's at, but he did send the chicken something to talk about the Ole Miss Rebels. And so before we dig into the Ole Miss schedule, we're going to go ahead and hear what Uncle Kenny has to say about it.
Here we go. From my beloved Uncle Kenny. One of my favorite authors is the Southern humorist Louis Grizzard. Recently, while I was returning from another trip to Patagonia to study the migratory habits of the yellow-rumped warbler, I picked up Grizzard's book, Elvis is Dead and I Don't Feel Good Myself. I was instantly taken back to my childhood, reading his column in my local newspaper. For those who don't know, Louis Grizzard was born on October 20th, 1946 in Fort Benning, Georgia. But he'd tell you he was raised in Moreland, a speck of a town where folks knew your business before you did. A Southern humorist with a typewriter as sharp as a switchblade, he turned everyday life, grits, football, and the quirks of Dixie into gold. After his folks split, he landed in Athens, Georgia, where he caught the writing bug at the University of Georgia. Though he never quite finished that degree, he started as a sports writer for the Athens Daily News, then climbed to the Atlanta Journal Constitution, where his columns became as Southern as sweet tea. Grizzard's books, like My Daddy Was a Pistol and I'm a Son of a Gun, sold millions, mixing nostalgia with the skepticism of modern nonsense. He waxed poetic about yogurt and Yankees moving south. Married 4 times, he joked his love life was a country song waiting to happen. His heart gave out on March 20th, 1994, after surgery at just 47, leaving behind a legacy of laughter and a voice that still echoes through the South. Folks say he's buried in Moreland, but his spirit's probably sipping bourbon on some porch sizing up the world. So, in honor of the man himself, I will be remembering the 2024 season as Louis Grizzard might have. The 2024 Ole Miss football season was like riding a roller coaster blindfolded. You didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or just hold on for dear life. It was a year that had more ups and downs than a possum crossing the highway. And by the time it was over, we were left with a 10-3 record that felt like finding a $20 bill in your old jeans. It's nice, sure, but you can't help but thinking you might have left a little bit more in the washer. Lane Kiffin, that slick-talking, Twitter-loving coach, was at the wheel, and if you ask me, he drove this team about as well as a man can when the road's full of potholes and the maps written in crayon. The season kicks off, sweet tea and big dreams. Back in August, the Grove was buzzing like a beehive in honeysuckle season. Folks were sipping hotty-toddies, wearing their Sunday best, and talking about how this was the year Ole Miss would finally break through. Kiffin had raided the transfer portal like a fox in a henhouse, cobbling together a roster that looked like it was built in a laboratory. With Jackson Dart slinging the ball like a man possessed, folks figured this was the year we'd punch a ticket to that fancy new 12-team playoff. Why, they even had Ole Miss ranked number 6 in the preseason polls, which is like being told you're the best-looking fella at the family reunion. It feels good, but you know there's a catch. The Rebels came out hotter than a firecracker on the 4th of July. They opened up by whooping Furman 76-0, and I swear it looked like they were mad at them for even showing up. Then they took care of business against Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern, rolling to a 4-0 record without breaking a sweat. The offense was humming like a finely tuned engine, and Dart was throwing touchdowns like he was handing out candy at Halloween. Folks in Oxford were starting to believe this might be the year they'd finally get over the bump. The stumbles and the glory. But then came Kentucky. Now, I don't mean to disrespect the Wildcats. They're a fine team, and their coach, Mark Stoops, is as solid as a cast iron skillet. But Ole Miss was favored by 17 points, and they had home field advantage. Still, Kentucky came in and stuck a 20-17 thumb right in their eye. That loss stung worse than a hornet on a barefoot. And it was the first sign that maybe this season wasn't going to be all magnolias and moonlight. Kiffin, to his credit, didn't flinch. He's got that cool-headed strut, like a man who knows the jukebox will play his song eventually. The Rebels bounced back, stomping South Carolina 27-3, and later hanging 63 points on Arkansas behind Dart's record-breaking 515-yard fireworks show. Then came the crown jewel, Georgia. Lord have mercy, that game was circled on every calendar in Oxford. The Bulldogs rolled into town ranked number 3, looking like they owned the place. But Ole Miss wasn't having it. They jumped out to a 21-3 lead and never looked back, winning 28-10 in a game that had the Vaught Hemingway Stadium shaking like a revival tent. The goalpost came down faster than a politician's promises after Election Day. But just when you thought it was safe to start dreaming again, along came Florida. The Gators handed the Rebels a 24-17 loss that felt like spilling gravy on your Sunday shirt. Messy and avoidable. Then LSU snuck up on them in overtime, and suddenly that playoff dream was deader than disco. They finished strong, topping Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl and thumping Duke 52-20 in the Gator Bowl. But 10-3 ain't 12-0, and in today's college football, close don't cut it. Lane Kiffin, sizzle, steak, and a side of skepticism. So how'd Kiffin do? Well, he's slicker than a greased pig at the county fair, and he's got a way of making you believe he's got all the answers. He turned a roster full of strangers into a squad that set a school record with 6,846 yards of offense, and he gave Ole Miss back-to-back 10-win seasons for the first time since Eisenhower was in the White House. That's no small feat, especially when you consider the SEC's tougher than a $2 steak. But those 3 losses, Kentucky, LSU, and Florida, stick in the craw like a fishbone. Kiffin's always been a bit of an enigma. He's got more tricks up his sleeve than a Vegas magician, and he's not afraid to take risks. Sometimes it works, like when he dialed up that fake field goal against Arkansas that had folks hollering like they'd won the lottery. Other times it backfires, like when he went for it on 4th down against LSU and came up short. And let's not forget his Twitter game. He's out there tweeting like a teenager with a new phone, throwing shade at other coaches and stirring the pot like a witch brewing trouble. It's all part of his charm, I suppose, but sometimes you wish he'd just hush up and coach. Still, you can't deny the results. The Rebels are relevant again, and that's something we ain't seen in Oxford since Eli Manning. He's a fine coach, better than most, but until he gets them over that playoff hump, folks will keep wondering if he's all sizzle and no steak. In this modern world of NIL deals and transfer portals, where college football's changing faster than a weather vane in a tornado, Kiffin's keeping up. But I reckon Grizzards look at him with a squint eye and say, "Boy, you're fancy, but can you fry the fish?" Wrapping it up, hush puppies and hope. Ole Miss finished the season ranked number 10 in the final AP poll, which is like being the prettiest bridesmaid at the wedding. Nice, but you still ain't the one getting married. They're close, though, real close. And with Kiffin at the helm, You get the feeling they might just get over that hump one of these days. He's got the Rebels dancing near the big stage, but they ain't quite cutting the rug yet. For now, I reckon we ought to tip our hats to the man. He's brought excitement back to Oxford, and that's worth something. Maybe even a cold beer and a pat on the back. In the SEC, where every Saturday feels like a family feud with shoulder pads, 10-3 ain't half bad. It's like going to the fish fry and finding out you've got extra hush puppies. Unexpected, but mighty satisfying. Here's to the 2024 Ole Miss Rebels. They didn't win it all, but they sure gave us a heck of a ride. And in the end, ain't that what college football's all about? Well, that and trying not to spill your drink when the band strikes up Dixie.
Wow. I don't know about you or our audience, but I sure have missed Uncle Kenny.
Uncle Kenny thrives.
Yeah. Bryson, welcome to Uncle Kenny.
What an interesting fella.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, there's a lot to dissect. There's a lot to dissect about Ole Miss's season. And as we say all the time, we're going to talk about Ole Miss and my guy, Lane Kiffin.
How you doing?
What words can you say?
Well, there's a lot.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to make it through the rest of the show without, needing to take a minute, fan yourself? I don't know.
I'm going to try my best. I am wearing my Lane Kiffin t-shirt.
How you doing?
That's right. So let's just dive into this thing, man, and really get into it because like I said, there's just so much to do, so much to talk about. And I'm pretty much going to skip the first 4 games. Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, and Georgia Southern. So like Uncle Kenny said, man, they started out 4-0. They're at the end of September. It's looking really good for Ole Miss. And then Brett Vander Griffgroff and the Kentucky Wildcats came into Ole Miss, man, and beat them 20-17. And what's crazy is, Jackson Dart, man, he had a good game. He had 261 yards, but that was just a fluke of a game, man. That should have never. If that game was played 10 times, they would have won 9 out of the 10. They just happened to lose that one.
Yeah, it was just a weird game. If you look at it, Kentucky didn't lead in any of the top 3 offensive statistic categories. Dart led in passing, Parrish led in rushing, and Harris led in receiving yards. So how the Wildcats managed to do it that day is a story for another episode, but they definitely just found the right mixture to come out with the win on. And it was a tight battle. They won by a field goal. But they just, I don't know if they caught Ole Miss overlooking Kentucky because Kentucky was already off to a rough start. If they just caught them looking to the following week against South Carolina, who was off to a good start, or if it was something else, but definitely what I would consider fluky.
Yeah, that game was just that's the best word to describe it. It was a fluky game. And then the very next week, man, they go to Carolina. And you and I have talked about this on the show and off the show many a times. If you want to go back and look at Carolina's season, which we will, this was Carolina's biggest loss. Carolina was not in this game at all. The other losses that Carolina had, they were close, but this one Carolina got waxed by Jackson Dart. Man, he threw for 285 yards, and a former Gamecock had almost 100 yards in the air, receiving yards, and so it was just it was a way different game. And I'm not going to get into too much of that because I'm sure you have a lot to talk about that. You probably watched every second of that game and couldn't keep your eyes off of it. So, and wasn't very happy at the end.
No, and I'll talk more about it, I'm sure, when we do the Carolina recap show. I'll just say this. There was a lot that went into that game for both sides. I think Ole Miss, I think Lane Kiffin likes sticking it to whoever he's playing. I don't think that it's singled out for any one particular school. So I'm not going to go down that path. I do believe that Juice Wells had something that he wanted to prove that day against Carolina, whether that meant that he was a leading receiver, whether that meant that he was going to be touchdown king of the afternoon, or whether that just meant that he got to come away with the W against his former team. And I think Carolina had a lot to prove on a lot of levels. I don't think that they were as dialed in that game as they needed to be to say, hey, let's just play Ole Miss and beat Ole Miss today. I think that there were just too many other things going on. The defensive side of the football, especially the defensive backs, were focused in on, we got to stop Juice. We're gonna shut him down and embarrass him. And well, that didn't play out all that great. And I think that there was something on the offense of, hey, Lenoris is back after his injury. Let's get out there and light these guys up, and instead of just focusing in on going to work. So not a fluky game like Kentucky against Ole Miss, but still it had its little quirks here and there.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about this, like you said, when we talk about Carolina's season in a couple weeks. But I will say this, Carolina's defense, which, and I'm not saying that's who carried them throughout the season, but their defense was definitely a very bright spot that they had. I mean, Carolina had a killer defense, and it was a young defense, so it's a hard ask for a young defense to be, lights out week in and week out. And I think this was just one of those moments where they had just a week, a weekday. And I mean, if you played this game 10 times, I don't think I could say that's probably a 500 that's a 500 win season, right?
Yeah.
I think this game could go both ways at any given point. So that was a big win for Ole Miss. And then the very next game, they have to play LSU at LSU. I'm sure that Joker was at night in Baton Rouge. We have been in Baton Rouge at night. It is a nasty environment. It is very hostile. I'm sure the fans were drinking heavy that day, and they lost to LSU, man, 29-26 in overtime. And we haven't talked about LSU season yet, but LSU was another one of those teams, man, that you just couldn't figure them out. I'm not sure how many yards Nussmeier threw for that game. I'm sure it was pretty high, but I mean, you had two stud quarterbacks with Jackson Dart and Nussmeier on the other end of the ball, man, and I'm sure it was just a shootout.
Yeah. We've been to both places at night, both LSU and Ole Miss. Both, if you're the visiting team, that's a tough place to show up. I just got the stat across 337 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks by Nussmeier in that game. So, Ole Miss obviously is doing everything, and you can tell by the score, to stay in that game, to find ways to win that game. And unfortunately, down on the bayou, it just wasn't quite enough that evening.
Yeah, again, if you take this game and you played it 10 times, this is probably another 500 game. That's a very, very hard environment to play in. And I'll say that, and I'll say that in a few more minutes. I'll say the same thing when we talk about their actual third loss. But they leave LSU. I'm sure their heads down a little bit. Kiffin trying to figure out a way to pump his team back up and say, guys, we're still in this. We're still in this. Then they take on an Oklahoma, beat them 26-14. Not a crazy score. Didn't blow Oklahoma out, but Jackson Dart had 311 yards, man, and they beat them. They even been on 12 points, so that was 2 scores. So another great win against Oklahoma.
It was, I think the thing that I would have liked to have seen in that game, which it not to take anything away from Ole Miss, but Oklahoma was struggling so much this year. I would have liked to have seen some type of thumping from Ole Miss, and it didn't click like that in this game. Again, you said it. Dart still lit up the field for 311 yards. A decisive victory for sure, as they do it by multiple scores, but it's not the 40 points on the board, 60 on the board that they hung the following week against Arkansas.
Yeah, and that's what happened the following week, man. They went to Arkansas, man, and beat them 63-31. Jackson Dart 515 yards. Uncle Kenny said that 515 yards in the game. Just crazy impressive. This young man, I'm going to tell you right now, before we continue going in more games, I believe Jackson Dart is the guy to watch in the draft this year. I do. I said that about Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. Everybody thought Jaden Daniels was going to be good. I said, you better watch out for Bo Nix. That kid can play ball. This Jackson Dart kid can play ball, man. He's really, really, really good.
Yeah, he's what we say all the time, right? He's not afraid to put his team on his back, and be that guy. In this particular game, he does light up Arkansas for 515 yards in the air. He also led his team in rushing with 47 yards against the Hogs that day. So he's not afraid to find a way to get it done. He obviously loves to toss it, but if he's got to put his head down and pick up a first down or scramble out of a broken pocket, he'll do that for you too.
Yeah, and then on November the 9th, I had to take off my my Lane Kiffin T-shirt that day.
How you doing?
and put on my G hat.
It probably needed to be washed anyway.
It did. I've been wearing it for weeks, man. And I didn't want to take it off. And look, I've only washed it once since. And hopefully one of these days, I will get Lane to sign it for me.
Then it will never come off. It will literally have to disintegrate off of your body.
Look, man, before we get into this Georgia game, let me just clarify a couple things. I like Lane Kiffin a lot, and we talk about him being my man crush and this and that. I like who he is. I like he's kind of that new Steve Spurrier kind of guy, with the exception of he doesn't hate Georgia. I hated Steve Spurrier because he hated Georgia. But I appreciated Steve Spurrier for, one, his ability to coach. He was a fantastic coach. Want to take anything away from him. The guy knew how to coach a football team. And same with Lane Kiffin. He knows how to coach a football team. Lane Kiffin knows how to get his players to buy in to what he's selling. That is a remarkable trait. We talk about, a coach being bigger than the program. Lane Kiffin is bigger than the Ole Miss Rebels. He's bigger than that football program. And so I just he got a bad rap when he left Tennessee, and I get it. If I was a Tennessee fan, I probably would hate him too. But he did leave to go for his dream job, someplace that I would think you would go want to coach too, right?
Sure.
You would want to go to Southern Cal and coach?
No. Not unless I had the ability to send them straight to a 0 and whatever record.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take whatever kind of money they want to throw at me to drive them straight into the ground.
Yeah, that's right. And look, man, he went to Southern Cal and he took over a crazy program, right? They were in shambles from all the stuff that they had with the Reggie Bush and all that other mess, and it was just falling apart right in front of him when he took it over. And then I think he made one of the smartest moves he ever made in his career was go to Tuscaloosa and sit with Papa Nick, right? And rebuild his self and his image. And Alabama can say what they want. We know quite a few Alabama guys, and Alabama was known as kind of like a Georgia, where we're going to smash you in the face with our defense, and 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 that's how we're going to win ball games. Well, Nick Saban said, I need to do something different. And Lane Kiffin was his answer, right? Lane Kiffin came into Alabama and brought a crazy electric offense to that program. And I, and Alabama won several, championships because of it. And the Alabama's offense is like that today because of a Lane Kiffin. And then, of course, he goes to Florida Atlantic, does great. Now he comes to Ole Miss, and kind of like what Uncle Kenny said, man, he's now got back-to-back 10-win seasons, I think, and he's doing great, man. He's he's just a good coach. The players like him, and he's funny. Eli Drinkwitz tries to be funny like Lane, and he's just not.
I think Eli tries to be Lane, and he's just not. I mean, down to the Air Force Ones that he likes to wear. Lane Kiffin's been wearing Jordans for years as that cool hip coach, and now you see Eli doing it. It's just sad. Eli, stop.
Yeah, just stop.
Just stop.
So he's just. Go ahead.
I was just saying it's really pathetic. But you mentioned the two back-to-back 10-win seasons. Kiffin's record right now at Ole Miss since getting there is 44-18.
Wow.
I mean, the dude he knows how to coach. He knows how to coach this team. He knows how and think about that. 44-18. I think he's been there 11 seasons. The dude is building something really special in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah. I think that's 4 seasons, 5 seasons maybe. It's not, he hadn't been there long. And what's really impressive about it, see, I'm a Kirby guy, right? I think Kirby Smart is probably one of the best coaches in college football right now, active coaches. Now that Saban's retired, I think Kirby is 1, 2, or 3. You can argue that there's some other ones that are right there, but I think he's at the top, right?
Mhm.
We got to keep in mind, Kirby inherited a very good Georgia program. Lane Kiffin did not. He didn't inherit a loaded Georgia. He inherited an Ole Miss. And he took what was laid in front of him, and that means his team, NIL, transfer portal, all the above, and said, I'm going to do something with this. And he did it better than anyone. And so, we joke about he's my man crush and whatever, but he's just a really good coach, and he does it, and he's just very impressive. He's a very, very impressive coach, and he's going to get his national championship. He's a national championship kind of coach for sure.
I agree. I think he's got to get his team into the playoffs, just like Uncle Kenny was talking about. You gotta get up on that stage. Don't be close to it. You've got to get up on that stage. And this next year might be the year that they do it.
Oh, I could be, but I also think that if DeBoer in Alabama, if he doesn't pull it together, a 9-3 season in Tuscaloosa, back to back, or even, my God forbid, he drops to an 8-4 season in Tuscaloosa, That's not going to cut it there. That place, that town, that program has the highest expectations than any program in the country. It's Alabama football, for crying out loud. I was at my brother's house the other day in Dallas, Thursday night, and we were talking about um, football and whatever. And for some reason, my brother became an Alabama fan because his wife was from Alabama. She grew up as an Alabama fan, so he just kind of adopted that and became a follower of Alabama. And I made the comment about I was talking about Senior Chief, and I said something about he's an obnoxious Alabama fan, and I said, as most are. And my sister-in-law looked up at me. She's like, "What?" And she went mad at me, but she's like, "I can't believe you just said that." And I go, "Well, wait a minute. Y'all have kind of earned the right to be obnoxious. 18 national championships. You deserve that." So the what's expected in Tuscaloosa is not an 8-4 season. So I say all that to say this: if the board doesn't get it together, I think Lane Kiffin could be their next coach at Alabama, and that could be where Lane Kiffin wins his national championship. It's possible.
I have two issues with your line of thinking.
Oh,
The first issue is you talk about whether or not DeBoer can get it together. This was his first year at Alabama, and he went 9-3. It's not uncommon with a coaching change for there to be a call it a readjustment season. I mean, you're coming in and yes, Saban has built this playoff championship juggernaut that from our perspective is just, well, cool. As long as somebody else can just grab the wheel and keep it between the lines, then they ought to keep doing the same thing. But that's not how it works with coaching, because every coach has their own perspective on how to coach, how to keep going down that championship road. I don't think a 9-3 year at Alabama demonstrates a deviation from that path. I think Alabama is still on that highway, and I think that we're going to see a lot of positive things this next year. Now, before we get too far down the Alabama trail on an Ole Miss show, I also think the Lane Kiffin part of your theory, I think that Kiffin is building that same map for that same highway to championship contenders in Oxford. There was a lot of buzz about, would Kiffin be a candidate here? Would Kiffin be a candidate? Could he? Would he? Blah, blah, blah. I think Kiffin has found a home in Oxford. In fact, he's building a new home there in Mississippi. I think he's setting his roots with the Ole Miss program.
it could. I mean, it could be a place that he stays and never looks back, and you know, and he's going to be relevant in Oxford. I don't think he has to go to a Tuscaloosa to be relevant. I don't. I
I
think he
think
can
he
do it
already
there.
is.
Yeah, well, I do too. He didn't make the playoffs, the first 12, first 12 team playoff system. He was close. You know, there was three teams that was on the outside looking in, and they were all, in my opinion, and they were all SEC teams, and Lane Kiffin was one of them. And so, like, the next game that they played was against Georgia. That was a huge win for him. Huge. It was in Oxford. You got to come to Athens this year, buddy. So you won't have Jackson Darnold. And Jackson Darnold only threw for 199 yards in Athens. They're just Georgia's offense. Like Georgia had another one of those weird years. And we'll get in Georgia's season later, in probably, I don't know, 4 weeks or something like that. But they roll into Georgia, man, or Georgia rolls into Oxford and gets beat 28-10. And
Yeah.
so there's Lane back on top again, right?
There's Lane back on top, a huge victory in that game. Um, not a whole lot to say. I mean, this was a game where Ole Miss did what it had to do. We talked earlier about uh, the game against Kentucky, where Kentucky just found whatever magic potion they needed to find a way to beat Ole Miss that day. This game, I don't want to say it from a fluke standpoint because I don't believe it was, but they found a way. Ole Miss did to beat the Georgia Bulldogs, and Georgia, for their part of that conversation, didn't really have a year. I know we talk about how they rolled in at number 3 in the country, but Georgia didn't have that kind of a year where you just looked at them and thought, "Oh yeah, these guys are a shoe in for the trophy." They just didn't have that feeling about them this past year. They were competitive. Obviously, they made it to the playoffs. They won the SEC, but there was just something off about him this past season. And when you have a competitor like Lane Kiffin, when you have a team like Ole Miss, that made for a great matchup, and for the Ole Miss Rebels, a great win.
Yeah, and I think one of the most impressive things, and we haven't necessarily really dive into that, but I think against Georgia is a good time to do that, is to talk about Jackson Dart, man. You talk about a tough kid. This dude took some blows, man. This last season, even the season before. And if you notice, if you look at the stat lines, he played in every game. He didn't. I mean, and I've seen him get hit and get up and limping, and the boy just kept going and going and going, man. Kind of like the Energizer Bunny, man. And so you talk about a guy that put his team on his back. Jackson Dart put his team on his back in a lot of games this last season.
Absolutely, and then would leave the field with the appropriate emotions after, whether it was a smile on his face after a W or just that determined look of fixing whatever needed fixing after a loss. Now they only had 3 of those, so he didn't have to have that look a lot. But he is definitely that consummate professional who I think any NFL team is going to count themselves very fortunate to have the ability to talk to.
I think so too. I think he is definitely built to be a great NFL quarterback for sure. Well, then this next game, and I'm going to say it before I'll say, they rolled into the swamp at Florida, and they lost 24-17. And Dart threw for 323 yards, and he ran for another 71. But um, Taylor, when he was on the show a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the swamp, right? And man, that's a hard place to come into. Matter of fact, I think we were talking about this game, and the swamp is a very hard place. I think Georgia, in a lot of ways, is very fortunate we don't have to play them there. We play in Jacksonville every year. It's the world's largest cocktail party. I've seen it with my own eyes a couple times. They're right by saying that, but it's a hard place to play. So Florida had that, that up and down season. DJ Lagway was getting his feet, wet. He's got some rhythm behind him, and Lane Kiffin just lost that game.
There is a wonderful mystique. I've not been to a game in Gainesville. I have been to Gainesville, Florida, and driven by the stadium, and there is just a wonderful mystique about that place that you cannot help but feel. For these guys to go down there on such a great year, I mean, at the time, they are 8-2. Looking to go into Florida, and really, because Florida was already starting to find themselves by this point in the season, it would be another statement win, I think, for Ole Miss. Now, had they won, it would have been passed along as just another business trip, because Ole Miss was making statements for themselves. But this loss um, hurt in a lot of ways. It really knocks them out of contention for the playoffs. So it doesn't sting a little, stings a lot. It's a loss on the road. Just a really tough thing for them to deal with, and it was a close one, right? Like you lose by a touchdown. I mean, in a game where you've got the offense to make that up and more, to have one that close, that's a hard one.
Yeah, and Florida was that game where Trey Harris finally came back since, he got injured and at the Kentucky game, and so he's just coming off of an injury. So it was just, again, these are one of these games where you look at it and you say, if they had to play it 10 times, what would the outcome be? And I would say it would be 50-50, maybe even lean heavier towards Ole Miss on this. I think Ole Miss had a better team than the Florida Gators. I think the Swamp was just a lot I think it got the best of them for sure. And then they closed out the regular season as they do every year in the Egg Bowl and beat Mississippi State 26-14. Not crazy, not like a lot of people beat Mississippi State this year, but it's the Egg Bowl. It's kind of like that game that's called the Iron Bowl, right? Where Auburn may not be as good as Alabama, but it's always a close game, and so they closed out the season, man, a 9-3 regular season. And let me tell you something else. We go back to Jackson Dart, right? This is why I think it's really. This is why, if there's any NFL scouts listening, as you should be, because you're going to gain a lot of insight from Chicken and the Dog and Bryson now on these college players, especially SEC players. But if y'all are listening, I want y'all to remember about this guy, Jackson Dart, man. Didn't make the playoffs. Knows he's going to the NFL. He wants to play one more game for Lane Kiffin and his Rebels. One more game, man. And he didn't come to Ole Miss as a freshman and play for 4 seasons. He was a transfer. This was his second year. It's not like he had, I think, matter of fact, he started out at Southern Cal. So it wasn't like, he grew up there in that program, whatever. But he wanted to play one more last game. So he played in the bowl game against Duke and threw for 404 yards. This guy was unbelievable. And beat them, 52-20? Man, very impressive. Like I said, if you're an NFL scout listening to the show, I'm telling you, man, pick this kid up. I think he'll do great for your program.
I'll say this. Jackson Dart is proof that you can be rehabilitated if you struggle with being a Southern Cal fan. There is hope. As far as the Duke matchup goes, to me, this was an I told you so victory. Lane Kiffin, because there was that triad of 9-3 teams from the SEC that believed that they deserved some type of a look their way to be in the playoffs, and Ole Miss was part of that conversation. None of them got in. This was the I told you so moment. So when all of these other schools started falling out of that 12-team playoff that in Kiffin's estimation didn't deserve to be there in the first place, he could point to this 52-20 score and say, see, I told you.
Yeah.
You should have given my Rebels a chance.
That's right. And of course, that was the attitude that he had. My guy, Lane Kiffin, he had that attitude, the same attitude as a Shane Beamer, same attitude as a DeBoer. Was they were trying to plead their case why they belonged in that over a SMU, over an Indiana, for crying out loud, maybe even over a Georgia. I mean, you saw how Georgia played in that first round. Actually, I guess it was the second round because they had to bye. They played terribly. So would have Ole Miss had a better opportunity than let's say at Indiana or an SMU to go further in the playoffs? I say yes. Carolina has that same argument. I say yes. Alabama had that same. I'd say depends on which Jalen Milroe shows up, but possibly yes. I mean, when Jalen Milroe was on, he was on. But this team, man, all in all, a 9-3 or a 10-3 overall season, man. Great season for you guys, man. Now, because you're my stat guy, how bad did Lane's been really good in the portal over the years. How bad does it look for them about losing people to the draft, or did they pick up any notable people in the portal?
So I'm not going to take your bait there and tell you who they picked up. This is the recap show. I'll tell you about all of that stuff on the forecast show. What I will tell you is that Ole Miss lost 14 players to transfer, meaning they've already made a decision, or portal, meaning that it's still out there. 9 of those did not have significant playing time last year. 4 of those were offensive linemen that were relatively low on their individual depth chart. The defensive back room got hit pretty hard. The top 7 on the chart are gone, either through graduation, NFL draft eligibility, or transfer. Their top 4 defensive linemen all gone to the NFL. Think about that for a second. Your top 4 defensive linemen all going pro. It's not like a mixture of they went this guy's going pro, this guy's transferring out, these 2 guys graduated. No, that's how good this D line was. Your top 4 guys are all going pro. That's how good they were. But now that's a big hole to fill. Your wide receivers room, 6 of the top 7 are gone, either through graduation, NFL, or transfer. Top 3 running backs gone. 5 of the top 6. There are only 8 in the running back room. And 5 of your top 6 are gone. The thing that really struck me about their depth chart this next year, I mean, obviously you've lost Jackson Dart. Walker Howard is gone. He's transferring out of the quarterback room. Now it's supposedly known that they've got QB1 in hand already for next year. They're forecasting, I believe, Austin Simmons to take that role. So no big surprise when Howard goes looking elsewhere for playing time. The big hit to me, however, is in the running back room, where out of your top 7 wide receivers, only one, Caden Lee, is still on the roster. Trey Harris, NFL. Jordan Watkins, NFL. Juice Wells going to the NFL. So 3 out of your top 4 are going pro. And then the next 3 are gone through a combination of already transferred out with Aiden Williams. Noreel White is in the portal, and Josh Aka has graduated. That's a big hit for a Lane Kiffin offense. What will he do? We'll talk about that later.
You know, Lane Kiffin will do what Lane Kiffin has always done. You know, and he's proven it time after time again. Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss Rebels are not the only team that's going to look way different than next year. A lot of these teams are. We talked about that last week when we were talking about Mizzou. Mizzou's offense is going to look way different. But I'll get back. I want to talk about what you said a minute ago about their defense and their defensive linemen. Going back and once you said that, it made me think, wow, how good was their defense last year? Holy smokes, man. Middle Tennessee put up 3. Furman put up nothing. Wake Forest only put up 6. Georgia Southern put up 13. Kentucky, they put up 20. South Carolina put up 3. LSU put up 29. Oklahoma put up 14. Arkansas was the biggest. They put up the most points on that defense, which was 31, but they beat them 63-31. So does that really matter? Then Georgia puts up 10 points. Florida puts up 24. Mississippi State puts up 14. So this defense was really, really solid, man. So I never look at Lane Kiffin's team as being a very strong defensive front because he's such an offensive guy. But man, you were right, man. Their defense was solid this year.
They were, as you like to say, loaded.
Oh, loaded. I wish we were loaded.
We're getting there, my friend.
Yes. So all in all, great season for the Ole Miss Rebels and my man, Lane Kiffin.
How you doing?
But look, man, I mean, I tell you, and look, it was great to have Uncle Kenny back on the show this week, man. I missed him a little. I missed him a lot. You can only take so much of him, but when you don't have him in your life for a little bit, you start missing him.
Well, he's a hard man to track down, and make no mistake, I've been on one of these trips with him. When he's locked in on studying the migratory habits of the yellow warbler, he's locked in, big guy. You're not going to break through that communication barrier. He's focused.
Yeah. Look, man, before we close this thing out, I do have, well, actually, do you have a chicken scratched for today? You know, we talk about that all the time.
The chicken scratch moment, which is brought to you again by OTC Kennels, is really related to teasing you about an upcoming episode, which is the forecast for Ole Miss. And exactly what is Lane Kiffin going to do? We talked about that tremendous hole. What kind of dirt is he going to use to fill that thing back up on the defensive line? What is he going to do to fill back up those holes in his wide receiver room? Again, the quarterback question probably already answered for the most part. But what exactly does a Lane Kiffin do? Is he able to find another maybe a ruby in the rough? I won't say diamond about Juice Wells, not because Juice Wells is not a great player. I don't want to take anything away from him, but I don't think he turned out to be maybe that shining diamond that Lane had hoped for. Nothing on Juice's part. He's going to the NFL, and I am not. So let's just take that away. But can he find another player like that, another Juice Wells in the portal? Or, just like you alluded to with Alabama, do they have a setback year this next year? Is there going to be a reset? That's your chicken scratch moment.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think it was easy for me last week to make a comment about Missouri. And look, I don't dislike Eli. I'm not the one that has. I mean, I think he's kind of a punk sometimes, and I think you're right. I think he does try too hard. He's that kid, that nerd that wants to be the cool kid and sees someone like a Lane Kiffin and was like, I want to be just like that guy.
Do you remember the episode of Seinfeld where they had the cool guy Tony? He had long hair and
Yes.
I think he was dating Elaine or something like that. And George is he wants to be like Tony and he wears a ball cap like Tony. Tony turns his ball cap around backwards. George immediately turns his ball cap around backwards. That's what Eli is to me, as far as him and Lane sitting at that coffee shop table, and he's Lane. Hey, what do you think of this, huh? What do you think of this?
So is Eli's new name Costanza? Wow.
If only he weren't so evil.
This is true. So yeah, look, man, that's a great chicken scratch, man. Like I said, last week, I think it was easy for me to say that Mizzou's season is going to go down. And I still believe that they're going to have a downward year. I'm not going to say that about Ole Miss. I think I'm not gonna say that about Lane Kiffin because he's Lane Kiffin, and he's proven over the years that he's always able to rebuild and reload and do well. So when we talk about the forecast show, I'll have to do some more studying on that and really put my best foot forward and try to really dissect what that season is going to look like. But I don't know, man. I think that's a tough call.
I just had another chicken scratch moment. Again, brought to you by OTC Kennels. Does Eli have a bigger man crush on Lane Kiffin than the dog? I want to put that out. I want to put that out to our listeners. Email us at chickenandthedawg@gmail.com. I want to know if you think that Eli has a bigger man crush on Lane Kiffin than the dog.
I think I can answer that. I'm going to ask you a question.
You're biased. You're biased.
No, I'm going to ask you a legitimate question. If me and Eli were in a room, both sitting down, Lane Kiffin walked in, which one of us would allow him to sit on our lap?
That's a push.
Push. I know I would. I mean, so you can go ahead. I mean, I'll raise my hand on that one. Come on, big boy. Come to daddy.
I'm telling you, so with the dark one.
So with the evil one. Maybe so. But look, before we end the show, man, I've got something I want to announce that I think is very, very, very exciting. I believe the next show that we record, you will be able to see our pretty faces. We are going to video. We believe that is the best next step for Chicken and the Dawg to take us to that next level. And the world is about to see our beautiful faces.
There'll be a line forming to the left for autographs and photo opportunities.
Oh, I'm for certain of that. Who doesn't want to get their picture taken with an ugly dog? Everyone does.
Probably.
Who even lets you sit on his lap?
That's right.
Probably Eli.
Maybe not Eli, but a lot of people will. So yeah, look, man, we're gonna go video. Bryson has been great. He's been helping us make that transition, and so Bryson, we thank you for that so much, man. And I think bigger and better things are to come for Chicken and the Dawg because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting ready to start posting everywhere. So looking forward to adding video to the content for sure.
Yeah. Look, man, I'm done. If you got y'all got anything?
I'm all crowed out.
All right, guys. Well, go ahead, Bryson.
Nah, there ain't too much other than, they're losing too much talent to the draft, man. I think he's going to have to attack that transfer portal pretty hard.
Yep, I think so too. And look, if there's anyone that could do it, it's him. He's proven that.
Absolutely.
Over the
I
years.
would argue he's probably the best transfer portal coach as of late. So pretty impressive.
Yep, that's for sure. Look, guys, follow us at on all the platforms. We're on all of them now. Email us at chickenandthedawg@gmail.com, just like the chicken said. He threw a question out there. So I'd love to hear y'all's responses. Look, guys, thank y'all. Love you. Deuces.
Bye.